Welcome to this video seminar all about Oscar Wilde's play The Importance of Being Earnest. This is one of many videos that I have uploaded onto my channel in recent weeks, aimed really at A-level students that are studying the play as part of their English literature course, but it might also be useful to anybody who is wanting to revise some of the main points of the play. So I've got videos on my channel to do with plot, all of the three acts, themes, symbolism, and also a video which introduces students to the social historical context, as well as the theatrical context, the style of dialogue, the relationship between seriousness and triviality, but also the relationship as well between facades and factual truth, I suppose. So have a look at those on my channel if you want to know more about the play. So the first thing to say then, or one of the first things to say about this play, is that the main aim of Wilde is to satirise and mock a upper class society which, in his view, was too preoccupied with masquerading a shallow mask of manners. That's a quote that's obviously used by Gwendolen in Act 2 when she has afternoon tea with Cecily. Masquerading is a good word to use with comedy because it means to adopt a degree of falseness to your persona. To masquerade means to disguise. So that is what Wilde is attacking here. The play was written in 1894 and first performed around 1895, and we call that the late Victorian era because Victoria was coming to the end of her reign. She actually died in 1901. So late is another word here meaning towards the end of. And the play is also a dramatic comedy and an example of a comedy of manners play. And they were popular at this time because it enabled characters to see themselves on stage, because going to the theatre was something that the upper class society would have done to remain true to their class. So the butt of the joke is really on the audience. The audience don't maybe know that they're the ones that are being mocked when they first sit down in that theatre. The reason for that is because it's an indirect attack from Wilde and an indirect parody of an upper class person's lifestyle at this time. So he uses, for example, irony to disguise that attack, but he also uses a form of satire called a Horatian satire, which is, again, wanting to indirectly attack your audience rather than being direct and making it clear who the target of your scorn is. So a Horatian satire is the opposite to a Juvenalian satire. A Juvenalian satire is much clearer and much more attacking and bitter about a particular injustice that it's wanting to foreground to an audience or to a reader. In terms of one of the main intrigues of this play, and a comedy of manners will often involve a degree of intrigue and also scandal, is Jack's identity. And one of the things that we learn very early on in this play, of course, is the fact that he doesn't know where he comes from. He doesn't know who his parents are, and therefore he doesn't know essentially his heritage. And one of the things that Wilde does to indirectly critique and mock the upper class's preoccupation with lineage is to replace familial lineage and bloodlines with railway lineage, and having Jack found as a baby in a handbag in a railway station. So you have railway lineage here and railway lines instead of bloodlines. In this play, there's a consistent juxtaposition between triviality and seriousness. In actual fact, those two words are included in the full title of the play, a trivial comedy for serious people. So there's always going to be this relationship between these two opposing kind of concepts. And in this play, and Wilde said so himself, that what he wanted to do was he wanted to treat everything that's serious with triviality and everything that's trivial with seriousness. And what that does is it makes the characters' preoccupations, to us at least, seem very superficial and shallow. The style of the play is very artificially sounding. The dialogue is not how we would speak in real life. There are no interruptions, there's no false starts, there's no swearing, there's no colloquialisms really, there's no fillers. there's no pauses. Everything is delivered in a very polished and fluid manner. And we might call this an example of an anti-naturalist style, because of everything sounding so polished and so fluid. It's as if it's being read rather than being spoken spontaneously. Something else to say about this play, when I get my brainstorm to work. There we go. In terms of the character of Lady Bracknell, so we can call in comedy Lady Bracknell an example of the comic villain. Comedy has a history and a pattern of using mother-in-laws, from Jack's perspective, of course, as being these very domineering, villainous characters. And the reason why they're called villains is not because they kill anybody, it's not because they are responsible for any bloodshed, like they would be in a tragedy, but it's because they represent a barrier to some form of happiness. And of course, in Earnest, the happiness for Jack is being with Gwendolen, Lady Bracknell's daughter. So we can also call Lady Bracknell an archetypal stock dowager or matriarch. She is exactly the target of who Wilde is mocking. And she's presented as hypocritical. She says, for example, in Act 3 that she isn't a fan of mercenary marriages, and yet she's in one with Lord Bracknell, who comically never appears. And I think the reason why he doesn't appear is because it's supposed to present him as kind of henpecked, whereas Lady Bracknell does all of the talking. And Lady Bracknell is the only character that doesn't feature in Act 2 because it enables the characters to pursue each other without fear of interruption. So if you look at the entrances and exits for dramatic methods, for example, there's a reason why Gwendolen says to Jack, you better hurry up with your proposal to me because Mama has a habit of coming suddenly back into the room. And that's exactly what happens a few minutes later. So there's a degree here of Wilde drawing attention to his own dramatic choices. I like students to use the term the restraining force of polite society. This is a society that puts particular value and merit on appearing polite and serious all of the time. And that actually becomes quite restrictive over time, because you have to weigh up the importance of your own impulses. So, for example, both Algy and Jack have an impulse to Bunbury at one time or another. They've got to therefore somehow subvert this restraining force of polite society, and find a way to hide from it as a way to get away with it. And of course, characters, even the minor characters like Miss Prism and Dr. Chasuble, like each other. But because of their roles and because they're supposed to be sacrificing themselves to others, whether that be Cecily or whether that be your parishioners, it means that you're not supposed to prioritise your own needs and desires, but of course what the characters are, and Wilde presents them as such. So whenever you have excessive manners, you're going to feel quite restrained because you've got to maintain that cordial behaviour all the time, and that prevents you from being honest about your true feelings. Both men Bunbury, and in this play, to Bunbury is a verb meaning to escape through deceit. And what they are escaping, of course, is the dogmatic society, which prevents them from seeking pleasure. So as human beings, we're quite bad at being serious all of the time. If we're serious all the time, we actually feel miserable and depressed. And that's why we look for ways in which to have fun from time to time. What Wilde is saying is to have his two men doing the same thing must mean that lots of people are Bunburying in the audience, even if they're not being honest about it. So these are people, of course, the upper class that set the rules and set the standards about what people should behave like, but yet they're also breaking their own rules, and therefore there's a degree of hypocrisy. Lots of men, for example, in the audience would have secretly been going to brothels. Lots of characters and lots of people would have been secretly having affairs, which was at odds with the serious depiction of what marriage was supposed to be. So just because they're not being honest about it doesn't mean it's not happening. And Wilde is using Horatian satire as a way to indirectly attack this. So Bunburying is a device, and I like that word device, is a way that these characters are escaping their obligations for a temporary period of time. And of course, it's that escape which enables us to be entertained, because it gets them involved in some difficult predicaments which as an audience we would find quite humorous to watch. This is a comedy, and comedies often rely heavily on coincidence, and there are three quite large examples of coincidences, quite important coincidences at the end of the play, which Wilde uses in order to tie up the loose ends of the plot. So Jack, it turns out, had a brother all along. He didn't have to invent one in the end. He had one. It was Algy. Jack really is called Earnest, which is lucky because that's what Gwendolyn wants. And Miss Prism, who has been in Jack's employment for years, held the answers all along to Jack's past because it was her that confused the manuscript with the baby. So it's all very coincidental in the end. And when you compare and when you join that coincidence with the pace of the ending, obviously it sounds very shallow and seems all very kind of superficial at the end. But of course, that's the point. It prevents it from having that degree of seriousness. Students will often refer to the title. The title is a pun because Earnest is a homonym, which means you have the same pronunciation but different spellings. Sounds the same, but it can have different meanings. So Earnest can be a proper noun referring to a man's name. The name Earnest was a popular name for boys at the time because of its characteristics. And of course, both men either are earnest or pretend to have an Earnest at one time or another in this play, and both women want a husband called Earnest, so that name is clearly important to the characters. But Earnest with the A is an adjective meaning honest and respectable, which were regarded as archetypal Victorian characteristics. That was an aspiration. You were supposed to be respectable and serious if you were to be anybody important. And that leads you to the word important, of course, in the title. Of course, there's little honest and respectable about lying about who you are. So again, there's that hypocrisy of these characters. To just be clear about both of these characters, Algy and Jack, and their these characters that they have invented to temporarily escape their societal obligations. Algy, in his words, has a dreadful invalid friend called Bunbury, so he can escape the town into the country. And Jack has a brother Earnest who gets into dreadful scrapes, so he can escape into the town from the country. And in so doing, both of these men are rejecting their obligations. So Jack, by going into the town, is escaping his rather boring country life maybe and his care of Cecily. And Algy is escaping the town to go into the country where nobody knows him, so he can meet up with lots of different women and probably have sexual affairs with them. That's, of course, the reason why he goes up to see Cecily in Act 2. So again, just to be clear, I often will get my students to say that these are devices. These people are devices. They're fake people as devices for these characters to escape their normal lives. Remember, in a comedy, it's often the pursuit of marriage which is comic rather than the marriage itself. So marriage is the destination. So what Earnest is effectively a journey of these two men who are pursuing a particular woman of choice. And in so doing, they get themselves into ridiculous predicaments and scrapes, which are quite absurd and farcical. They only have themselves to blame, of course, but from an audience, we find that very entertaining to watch. And because we have bought tickets to see a comedy, we want to laugh. That's why we're going there for. So we want these characters to make life difficult for themselves. Algy and Jack, of course, are both lovable rogues. They're both scoundrels. And we like those because they often are entertaining for us. And after a play like this, these can be an audience's favourite characters because they've made us laugh the most. So again, we can call them lovable rogues. In terms of Gwen and Cecily, both of them, as I've said, place a high amount of significance on the name Earnest. They both want to be with a man called that because they are shallow. They are relatively insipid, you could say, and they're trivial because what they're doing is they're suggesting that the standard of a marriage and the health of a marriage is based on the name of your partner rather than actually who that partner is. So it just goes to show that they have their priorities all wrong. And it's Wilde's way, of course, of mocking the significance that the Victorian society place on being earnest, as in the adjective with the A. Finally, and there are other points as well, I'm sure, but these are the ones that I've chosen to talk about in this video. The men's deception is entertaining to watch because they get themselves into ridiculous predicaments while they're masquerading as other people, or while they're masquerading as having a reason to escape their respective locations. The audience finds that hilarious because we know exactly what they're doing. So because of the dramatic irony, we delight in seeing other characters completely oblivious to what these men are doing. So with comedy, there's also a lot of lies, deceit, and that can create confusion, which can create chaos, which creates disequilibrium. And we enjoy watching that because it's, again, a form of entertainment that helps us as an audience escape our regular lives. The final thing I just want to add is the fact that, of course, in a comedy of manners play, there's going to be this juxtaposition between towns and countries, which we have here. So Act 1 takes place in the town, in London, and Act 2 and 3 take place in the countryside, in Jack's manor house. And that often shows this difference in I suppose, the way in which characters view each other. So Gwendolen hates Cecily because she thinks that she's a simpleton and a country bumpkin, unrefined people in the country, whereas Cecily hates Gwendolen because she associates city living with vulgarity and with greed and with pollution and with poverty, not the fresh air, for example, that you would have in the country. And the feelings of each other's respective locations are seen in their passive-aggressive attack of one another in Act 2 during their afternoon tea. So the town and country divide is often of significance. If you were to talk about settings, if you've got a question about settings, or you were wanting to write an essay about settings, I would be encouraging students to talk about the town and the country contrast, which runs throughout most of the play. So thank you very much for watching. Those are just some of the key revision points for Wilde's play, The Importance of Being Earnest, and good luck with your studies. Thank you.